Did Jesus really rise from the dead? Or is Christianity built on one big mistake? Because if the resurrection didn't happen, Christianity totally collapses. But the flip side of that is if it did happen, everything changes. This isn't just a question of faith, this is a historical question. So let's look at the evidence and follow it where it leads to. Let's start with what almost all historians agree on. Jesus Christ was a real person, a Jewish teacher in the first century. This isn't just from the Bible. The Roman historian Tacitus confirms Jesus was executed. Jewish historian Josephus refers to him and his followers on multiple occasions. Jesus gathered disciples, performed acts people described as miracles, and made radical claims, not just about God, but about himself. Claims like forgiving sins, accepting worship from others, calling God his Father in a unique way that nobody else would do. So from the start, Jesus isn't just a moral teacher, he's making divine claims. Now here's something even more certain. Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate. This is one of the most secure facts in ancient history. Crucifixion was brutal, public, and very definitely final. The Romans were experts in execution. People didn't survive crucifixion. So Jesus dies publicly, violently, and definitively. And that should have been the end of the story right there. Because in the first century, a crucified Messiah wasn't just unlikely, it was completely unthinkable. But something happened. Because days later, his followers are not just saying, we remember his teachings, they're saying, we have seen him alive. And not just one person, multiple individuals, groups at different times. And this belief appears immediately, not just generations later. So now here we have this historical problem. How do you explain a dead man whose followers are suddenly convinced he's alive? Historians, whether religious or not, generally agree on several key points. Firstly, the tomb was reportedly empty. Even opponents of Christianity had to explain the missing body. Secondly, the disciples believed they saw Jesus alive. This isn't debated. The question is why they believe it. The disciples, thirdly, were transformed. They moved from a place of fear, of bold proclamation of their faith. They went from hiding to publicly proclaiming the resurrection to anyone who can hear. Many were willing to suffer and die for this belief. And then the fourth thing was the rise of Christianity. The movement exploded in the very city that Jesus was executed. This isn't based on philosophy, not based on ethics. The rise of Christianity was based on one claim: he is risen. Now here's the key question. The key question is what best explains these facts. So let's have a look at some of the logical options into the explanations for the resurrection. Our first explanation is quite simple, and that's that those who saw him hallucinated. Hallucination was the answer. But you see, hallucination, it doesn't happen to groups of people, and they don't explain the empty tomb. Too many people saw Jesus risen for hallucination to be the answer. Maybe it was the fact that Jesus' body was stolen from the tomb. Then if that was the case, the disciples would have known it was a lie. And let me say, would you die for a false lie? Would you die for the lie that you told? Absolutely not. Why die for something that you know is false? Maybe it's simply a legend that's developed. But you see, legends, they take time to develop. And the resurrection claims appear within years, not centuries, of Jesus' death and resurrection. Each natural explanation struggles to account for all of the evidence. But there is one explanation that does. The only thing that makes sense is that Jesus actually rose from the dead. But don't take my word for it. Let's follow the evidence. Now, let's be honest, that explanation requires something big, doesn't it? It requires, firstly, that God exists, that God acts in history, and that miracles are possible. But let me challenge you on this. If God exists, then the resurrection isn't just possible, it's entirely plausible. And suddenly everything begins to fit, doesn't it? The empty tomb, the appearances to those in the first century, the transformed lives that were born out of seeing the risen Jesus, the explosive growth of the church, it all suddenly starts to make sense. So as we draw this to a conclusion, when you follow the evidence all the way through, you're left with this: the most coherent, consistent, and complete explanation is that Jesus Christ lived, that Jesus Christ died, and that Jesus Christ rose again. And if that's true, then he wasn't just a teacher, he wasn't just a prophet, he is exactly who he claimed to be. Jesus is God. God made man. And here's the final question. What will you do with that? If you want to know more or you want help with answering that question, please get in touch. You can get me at County Durham Christian Life Centre. Drop me an email at jamie@cdclc.co.uk or get in touch with me on social media. I'd be happy to help you on the journey of exploring what will you do with Jesus, God made man.